Or feel like popsicles. Maybe. All right. Well, let's see. So if you go into our quarterly, we are in lesson 7, page 46. And there's a, I don't know if you looked at that picture that's there. That is Absalom, but that is not in this week's lesson. That is in next week's lesson. So we're foreshadowing on that one. Would somebody like to read the Seeking the Context? That's on page 46 and half of 47. Thank you, Sister Joanne. Welcome back. So a lot of things happening. So if we think back on what's already happened before today's lesson, David sees Bathsheba. He gives in to temptation. He's already gone down the wrong path by disregarding God's guidance to Hebrew kings by taking many wives and concubines, so he'd already done that. With idle times on his hands, he proceeds to have Bathsheba brought to him, and he commits adultery. Soon after, she is pregnant. However, her husband Uriah is away at the war with Ammon. And although David tries twice to get Uriah to go home and be with his wife, Uriah is too loyal, and David orders Joab to ensure that he's killed in battle. In fact, he has Uriah carry his own death warrant back with him to the battle. So he hands the orders to Joab unknowingly. So we see here where temptation leads to lies, deceit, adultery, and murder. Some of these things being punishable by death according to the Mosaic law. So David has not only violated God's commandments, he's violated it serious enough to be killed for it. We saw in last week's lesson, Nathan confronts David. Thou art the man. It's only 4 words, but it was enough to convict David. And he repents, and he immediately gets the judgment that God communicated to him through Nathan. The judgment's twofold. David's own life will be spared. God's promise to David that the Messiah will come from his lineage is still in place. So David will be blessed more than he deserves. However, the observation that you reap what you sow is in place. David is going to have many problems. We're going to see more about that today. We read it last week, but it's really worth reading again today. If someone would take a look at Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 and 8, and read that for us, please. That's Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. There's just a few words there, but they're going to find out that they have huge consequences for David. We looked in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 9 through 12, where we saw what God's judgment was upon David. In verse 9, wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord, to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house. I'm going to read that again. The sword shall never depart from thine house. We're going to see more about that today. Because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house. We're going to read 2 chapters today, and that's not even the whole of it. It's just the partial story of what that really means. And I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. So what is the significance of that when he says it's going to be before all Israel? It's going to be in the daytime. What does that mean? Right, it's not just a few people, it's the whole kingdom. The whole kingdom of Israel will see what's happening, and they will know that what David has done and the punishment that God is placing upon David for what happened. So it's a very public thing. Something that David had done in secret is now a very public thing. And the story of Nathan communicating to David was also known. We'll find out more about that as we keep going. Before we get into the details of our lesson today, I wanted to kind of review some of the things we'd already looked at before. David had many wives and he had many brothers, and we've studied that, but not recently. And so I'm just going to go through that a little bit. So David's 6 wives and their sons were, the first one, anybody want to say who the first one was? Yeah, she's the first one. Yep. So she's on the list. That's I say Michelle, but it could be Michael. I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce it. And she had no children. That was significant. And she had no children because of the way she treated David when they brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. She was scorning David, and pretty much from that moment, David had decided she would have no children. The next one was Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess. Saul had a wife named Ahinoam, but it was a different one. She wasn't a Jezreelitess, so that's how we separate those. And her son was Amnon. So that was the eldest son of David. Then who was the third wife? Anybody want to guess who the third wife was? Abigail, absolutely. And so Nabal, the wicked man, had done some very foolish things, and David was on his way to pretty much kill him and all of the people. And Abigail was pretty smart about it and went out and met David and David's forces, and in fact made such a big impact that David actually decided to marry her, and they had a child who was the second son, and their name was Chileab. And if you want to look for that, that's in 1 Chronicles 3:1 and 2 Samuel 3:3. So it took a little digging to figure all these names. Then the fourth wife, Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. That's important because he's going to come up again in the story we're going to see about today. So his son was Absalom. David's son was Absalom, and he was the third son, and then also Tamar, the sister. The fifth wife was Haggith, and the son from Haggith was Adonijah. And then the sixth wife was Abital, and Shephatiah was the fifth son. And then 7 was Eglah, that's seventh wife, and the sixth son was Ithream. And then the last wife was Bathsheba, absolutely. So Bathsheba. So there's an unnamed baby, was the seventh son, and then the eighth son we haven't seen yet, but that's Solomon. So we're going to see more about that. Okay. Right. Yep. And so if we were to look at 2 Samuel 3:2-5, we would see what we just read. Okay, David also had brothers. He had brothers, and this is like the oldest to the youngest. Eliab, Abinadab, Shammah or Shema. That's the third one, and what's important about him is he had a son named Jonadab. That was Amnon's cousin. The fourth brother was Nathaniel. The fifth one was Radai. The sixth one was Ozem. And then it shows the seventh one as David. And there's another reference that shows 7 brothers and then David. And so the speculation is there was a brother born that didn't have any children and may not have been named. So the bottom line of that is that David was the youngest brother. And he's the one that became king. Okay. And if you want to see about that, that's in 1 Chronicles 2:12-15. We're going to come back to some of those people. Okay. So we talked about what's coming a little bit, God's judgment and David reaping what he's sown. So let's talk about something else for just a minute. So when you plant a seed, what are you planting if you're going to do something at home? house or your yard or whatever it is, what do you do? How do you do it? Hmm? Right. You prepare a bed for it. You get the seed. How big is the seed? Yeah. Well, what it is, usually like this, right? I mean, it's pretty small size if it's a seed for something you're going to plant. Um, let's say we planted a seed of corn. What comes from a seed of corn? Stalk? Yep. Ears? Yep. What else? A lot of it, right? So you put in one seed, and one seed is the same as one tiny piece of one ear. So what you've done by planting the seed is you've multiplied that one seed probably for one corn stalk over 100 times easily, right? And so this whole idea of reaping what you sow, it's not that you sow a seed and you get a seed back. It's that you sow a seed and you might get 100 times, 1,000 times. You're going to get more than you ever imagined coming back from that one seed. And so, if we're planting corn and we're planting a field, we're going to put maybe 1, 2, 3 seeds in a hole. For corn, that's going to be a stalk. It's going to come back many times over. Feed the family, feed however many people. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's more than you can imagine if you're thinking of multiplication. But when you apply this to what David has done, David committed adultery, he committed murder, one person each, right? Okay? But this is the law of reaping what you sow. So we're going to see in our example, and what we're going to read today, it's not just reaping one time. You're going to see how it's almost like when we were growing up. You said, "Hey, Dad, let's plant a watermelon." So we did. It took over the whole garden. We had a whole garden full of watermelons and watermelon seeds and vines and everything else. And I think it took over all the space we had and then some. And it was far beyond we ever imagined. And I think in this case, what's happening is the same thing is happening to David. So first of all, David is completely discredited. Everything he did is known publicly for all of Israel. And the Lord says, the sword will never depart from his family. So that's a foretelling. The sword shall never depart from thine house, and I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house. Okay, so we just read about his brothers and we read about his children. Now in our lessons today, their names are going to come up quite a bit because those are the ones that are going to be the ones that are doing all these things. Okay, would somebody like to read 2 Samuel 13, 1 through 4? Okay, So here you're seeing what's happening with Amnon, where he says that he loves his half-sister, Tamar, which is the sister, full sister of Absalom, and he's very much preoccupied with it to the point of he's not doing much anything else. And his friend, Jonadab, one of his other family members, says, well, what's going on? What's the problem? And so he tells him. Verse 4, he tells him what's going on. So now we're going to see here and what happens in verse 5. If somebody would read verses 5 through 11, see what happens next. Okay, so what do you think about that? What we just read? Right. And this was similar to what David did with Bathsheba, right? What about the plotting and the scheming and all that part of it? That was similar to what David did also. And did you notice that David was part of the scheme? Did you notice that? He was a player in it. He didn't know about it unwittingly, but he was a player in it, and that's exactly what David had done with Joab in terms of asking for Uriah to be drawn in the battle and then draw the people away from him, basically to murder him. Uriah wasn't dumb. In this case, David is dumb. He doesn't know exactly what's going on. And so this is David's own family. This is his own children that are plotting to do wicked things against others of his children. So where are all these people living? Are they all living in the same place? Are they all living? Yeah, they're all living in the palace. They're all living nearby. So we're talking about a whole country of Israel that was impacted by what David had done. But now all this is happening, this wickedness, it's all happening within his own palace, within his own family. And these are some of the most wicked things that you can imagine. And they're happening right there. So what about Tamar? Did she do anything she shouldn't have done? Right, she resisted, so she really didn't do anything other than what she was supposed to do. Right, she's a victim. She's a helpless victim in this case. And Amnon's not thinking anything about it. He's not concerned about that at all. Basically treating her just like an object versus actually as a person. Yeah, David's kind of oblivious. And it doesn't show, it doesn't give us any insights whether David was praying about this, anything. Maybe he just thought it was no big deal. And he thought Amnon was really sick and he wasn't baking it. He just didn't necessarily think anything about it. And so we go through all the steps. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So David was very unwise in whether he was completely thinking of other things or whatever. We don't have any good insights into it, but we do know what God said was going to happen, and here it is, it's happening. And so Tamar does all the right things. We get to uh, when she took the food into him, and then verse 11, he says, "Come lie with me, my sister." And then we see what Tamar says here in verses 12 and 13. Would somebody like to read that? So she's trying to talk him out of it. She's trying to explain that this is a wicked thing that shouldn't be done by anyone in Israel, much less somebody in David's family. And the fact that this is a folly against someone in David's family, and actually in this case, Amnon is the heir to the throne, or the apparent heir, because he's the eldest. So the expectations of him are higher. And it says, "And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee." So she was trying to buy some time to have some more thinking about this whole situation, but there's really nothing about that was going to happen. In verse 14, "Howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. So he raped his sister." And then in verse 15, "Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, be gone." So what happened in verse 15? Right. And maybe even for a moment he considered and said that it was a folly for him to do this, that it was the wrong thing for him to do this. And now I almost think that he hated himself for what he did. Right, because he still knew it was wrong, even though he had done it. Right, right. Things that remind us are the things that point out our wickedness. In verse 16, and she said unto him, there is no cause, this evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. But he would not hearken unto her. Then he called his servant that ministered unto him, and said, put now this woman out for me, and bolt the door after her. Okay, so he is completely throwing her out. It said in verse 18, and she had a garment of diverse colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Then the servant brought her out and bolted the door after her. So in this culture and in this time, what just happened? Right, and she was defiled forever in their culture. And so there would be no other person that would take her to be her husband in this culture. And in fact, most would assume that it was her fault, not his fault, that all this happened. So I don't have the exact verses, but we remember back when Jesus was here for his earthly ministry, that they had brought a woman that was caught in adultery to him uh, to see what he would say about it. But there was no idea where the man was, right? Wasn't even there. So as we start taking a look in verse 19, and Tamar puts ashes on her head, and rent her garment of diverse colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went on crying. So obviously she was grieving for this whole thing in a very obvious way. In verse 20, and Absalom her brother said unto her, hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister. He is thy brother, regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. So, making the whole situation even worse, Absalom is telling her not to say anything at all to anyone about it, because he has something else in mind. It doesn't say that here yet, but he has something else in mind completely. And so he tells her to be quiet about it and don't say anything, which is just as wicked as all the other things we've been reading about here. And so you see one wicked thing to the next wicked thing to the next wicked thing to the next one. And so what we're seeing here is almost like a chain reaction of wickedness in David's family. And it was all foretold by God in his judgment on David, and now it's actually happening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. From the first moment, he wanted a revenge on this. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this all started when David, who was following God, was tempted, and he yielded to that temptation. And then that led to wickedness, and more wickedness. And with every step that he took, he was walking away from God with every single step that he took. And so all of that was known. And so now, how about his testimony with anybody, with Israel, with his family, with anybody at all? They would just say, David just did the things that he did to become the king and have more power and authority and all that. And now here he is doing what everybody else does. So, right. I can't imagine having more than one wife. For me, honestly, I don't know how that would even work. Um, I don't know. Uh, Obviously, he had a tendency for that, and as you said, there's problems that come from that. And if you think of it this way too, it's not just a matter of any family, it's David. David's the king. Every single person in his family is concerned about who's going to be the ruler next. Between all those brothers, am I going to be the next one in line? Am I going to be the next one to rule the country? That's a lot of what they're thinking about. And so yeah, he did. He invited the king. So yeah. So here in verse 21, when David heard of all these things, of what happened with Tamar, he was very wroth. He was very angry. But then he didn't do anything. That's it. He just got angry. He didn't do anything at all. And so we see this a lot of times where people might get angry about something and they don't do anything at all. And then the situations just get worse. Verse 22, and Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shears in Baal Hazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, Behold now, thy servant hath sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant. And the king said to Absalom, Nay, my son, let us not all go now go, lest we be chargeable unto thee. And he pressed him, howbeit he would not go, but blessed him. So here again, David is unwittingly part of another plan. Then said Absalom, If not, I pray thee, let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said unto him, Why should he go with thee? But Absalom pressed him that he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, Smite Amnon, then kill him, fear not. Have not I commanded you, be courageous and be valiant? And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him up upon his mule and fled. And it came to pass, while they were in the way, that tidings came to David, saying, Absalom had slain all the king's sons, and there is not one of them left. Then the king arose and tare his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants stood by with their clothes rent. And Jonadab, here's Jonadab again. He's part of the problem just as much as anybody. Here he is back again, now speaking to the king. The son of Shemaiah, David's brother, answered and said, Let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon only is dead. For by the appointment of Absalom this hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. Now therefore let not my lord the king take the thing to his heart to think that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon only is dead. But Absalom fled. And the young man that kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there came much people by the way of the hillside behind him. And Jonadab said unto the king, Behold, the king's sons come, as thy servant said, so it is. So here's Jonadab patting himself on the back. Oh, there's great news. I'm the one giving you the great news. I'm taking care of you, king, even though he was behind the original plan that started all this in the first place. And it came to pass, as soon as he had made an end of speaking, that behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all of his servants wept very sore. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. So who is that? His grandfather. Yes. And David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. So it looked like over time David got used to the idea of Absalom being dead and the fact that he deserved to die for what he had done, even though he wasn't the one that gave judgment. Over time, he wasn't as upset about the whole thing as he was when it happened. So now, what's the significance of Absalom? So when we went back, we looked at all the brothers. So Absalom is the third son of David. And in other things that I read, it said Chileab did not have any designs on becoming the king. And so, if that's truly the case, then Absalom thinks he's going to be the next king. He's the next one in line, and there's other reasons he thinks he's going to get it besides that. Man, we're already out of time. So, okay. So, in the next bit, Joab gets involved. He tries to help Absalom, and says, can we figure out a way to get Absalom back into Israel? And so he hires this woman who is an actor and has her dress up like a widow, and says one of her sons was also killed. And so he put on a big act for David. And it was similar to the situation that happened with Nathan, where Nathan told a story, and then David said, then this man should be dealt with and all these things. And then Nathan said, thou art the man. It's another version of that here, except this is Joab behind it and this woman that he's hired. And the whole agenda here is to get Absalom back into Israel, which does in fact happen. And then once that happens, David does not have him come back to the palace. He comes back to Israel. He doesn't lay eyes on him for a couple of years. Absalom's getting tired of the whole situation, so he keeps bugging Joab about it, and he doesn't do anything. So finally he lights Joab's crops on fire to get his attention, which he does. And then what happens is Joab then makes a petition to David, and then at the end of this, if you look in verse 33, this is 14:33. So Joab came to the king and told him, when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on the face on the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So after all this dramatic things happening, we see at the very end that Absalom is back. He's back not only in Israel, he's back in the king's palace, which is the preamble for next time. Also, parenthetical note, Absalom got his hair cut, and when he got his hair cut, the part that they cut off was about 4 pounds per year. So he had a lot of hair. That's important to remember. If you remember the picture from the beginning, it was for the wrong lesson. We're going to see that for the next lesson. Thank you for your patience today. Appreciate it.